On December 3rd, Moscow once again became the focal point of global diplomacy as senior American and Russian officials met for the most significant talks since the war in Ukraine began. The meeting came amid growing international pressure to find a path toward ending a conflict that has entered its third year, reshaped Europe's security order, and caused immense human and economic damage. The U.S. delegation was led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, accompanied by senior advisor Jared Kushner. The pair met Russian President Vladimir Putin inside the Kremlin for approximately 5 hours. According to officials familiar with the talks, discussions focused on exploring conditions under which hostilities could be reduced and whether a broader political settlement was still possible. The timing of the meeting was critical. On the battlefield, Russia had just claimed the capture of Pokrovsk, a strategic city in eastern Ukraine, after months of intense fighting. Russian officials presented the development as evidence of momentum, strengthening Moscow's negotiating position ahead of the talks. Ukrainian authorities, however, disputed the strategic significance of the claim, noting continued fighting in surrounding areas. Even as diplomats met behind closed doors, the war showed no sign of slowing. On the same week as the Moscow talks, Russian missile strikes hit several Ukrainian cities. In Dnipro, one of the deadliest attacks killed 4 civilians and injured more than 40 others. Residential buildings were damaged, emergency crews worked through debris, and hospitals struggled to cope with the wounded. The attacks underscored the stark reality that diplomacy and destruction were unfolding simultaneously. Following the meeting, Russian officials described the discussions as productive, suggesting that both sides had outlined potential frameworks for de-escalation. While no official document was released, reports indicated that a revised U.S.-backed peace plan was discussed. The proposal reportedly included a temporary ceasefire, international monitoring mechanisms, and phased steps tied to sanctions relief and security guarantees. Territorial issues remained the central obstacle. Ukrainian leaders responded quickly, rejecting any proposal that would recognize Russian control over occupied territories. Kyiv reiterated its position that sovereignty and internationally recognized borders were non-negotiable, warning that any compromise on territory would undermine international law and reward military aggression. The talks also reflected a shift in Washington's broader approach. Under the Trump administration, U.S. policy toward Ukraine has evolved, emphasizing direct engagement with Russia and prioritizing rapid conflict resolution. Former President Trump has repeatedly stated that he could end the war in 24 hours, a claim that has drawn skepticism but signals a willingness to pursue unconventional diplomacy. The December 3rd meeting was widely viewed as a test of that approach. Across Europe, reactions were cautious and, in some cases, uneasy. European Union officials stressed that any peace process must include Ukraine as a full participant. Governments in Eastern Europe, particularly those bordering Russia, expressed concern that a deal reached without strong security guarantees could weaken regional stability and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. At the same time, the humanitarian situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate. Ongoing missile attacks, power shortages, and infrastructure damage have left millions facing winter conditions with limited access to heating and electricity. For civilians, the promise of peace remains distant, overshadowed by daily threats to safety and survival. By the conclusion of the December 3rd meeting, no formal agreement had been reached. However, both sides agreed to continue diplomatic engagement through follow-up discussions and working-level negotiations. Analysts caution that while dialogue is a necessary step, the gap between the positions of Moscow, Kyiv, and their respective allies remains wide. As 2026 approaches, the question remains unresolved. Do these talks represent the first real step toward ending Europe's largest conflict since World War II, or are they simply another pause in a prolonged and brutal war? For now, the outcome depends on whether diplomacy can outpace the realities of the battlefield. Subscribe and follow us on social media for more verified global stories and analysis.